Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for Chats from Home. My name is Tyler Perrett. I'm the Chief Policy and Partnerships Officer for Aon. And if you'd like, as you join, go ahead and put maybe who you are and who you're with or how you're connected with Aon in the chat. We'd love to see who's here with us today. We'd also like to thank our generous sponsors, U.S. Bank and Rental History Reports. Thank you so much for helping make today possible. We're very excited for the conversation and excited for all the people that can join us. All right. With that, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Dr. Eric Anthony Johnson, Aon's President and CEO, to Chats from Home. Eric, great to see you.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate it. First of all, let me say thank you to the Aon team for putting this together, and a big shout out to everybody that's joining the call today. Really appreciate it. Let me start out by just talking about the state of affordable housing. Just kind of want to give like a quick narrative. Most of you may know Aon has been around for nearly 40 years. We actually turned 40 in 2026. But let me just talk about this. I'm going to call it this sort of perfect storm that Aon has been facing along with some of our counterparts. So let me talk a little bit about the financial, economic, and just logistical challenges we have been facing. And many of you already know that this is already tough business because the population we seek to serve, of course, we believe are well deserving, and affordable housing is tough business. But let me just talk a little bit about the challenges. From an economic perspective, the pandemic in particular really created some unintended consequences that have put pressure on Aon and our partner organizations. So I think it's safe to say if you talk to anyone operating in the space of affordable housing, they will basically mirror what I am saying right now. And those issues are just a sheer challenge in terms of hiring people, because I'm going to say that the industry has really changed. Workers are sort of just moving around at an accelerated pace. The wear and tear that is happening on the properties, in particular, due in part to a elongated unintended consequence of the eviction moratorium, right? So when you think about that and the impact it's having on just being able to provide the necessary maintenance and repairs needed at the properties. So when you think about that and you think about security issues in particular, we are not the police. And part of our mission is to work as hard as we can to provide safe, decent, and affordable housing. But I have to tell you, those issues are just so far beyond our control. But we do everything we possibly can to deal with it. Think about issues like rising insurance costs. The numbers are staggering in terms of what we and others in the industry are facing in terms of the sheer rank and file cost that's going up on the insurance side of the equation. I'm talking about all of this because those issues ultimately have an impact on our ability to operate and manage the properties. And our mission has been and will always be, and we'll take on challenges doing it, to provide home for individuals seeking affordable housing. Now, that's tough because those issues are pressing upon the livability and the experience of our residents. And first and foremost, let me say to everyone that's listening, our team, we are really pulling back the curtain with an emphasis on a laser focused emphasis on a resident experience. That is ultimately what we want to be about. Do we have a way to go? Absolutely. But I can tell you that this team is committed to that experience. But when you think about the challenges that we are facing right now, and I don't want anyone to underestimate the challenges, we are doing everything in our power to ensure that Aon is here for the next 40 years, 50 years, well beyond our lifespan, to be able to provide ongoing housing. So when I talk about the state of affordable housing, this is the narrative. Some will say, well, the state just passed a historic budget related to housing. Absolutely. But think about it this way. The rank and file organizations, Aon and others, have to be strong organizations in order to serve the mission of affordable housing. So yes, the state provided significant support, but that is not like $1 billion coming to Aon. So I'm just saying this so you really know the state of the reality in terms of affordable housing. But let me say this, more importantly, this crisis is not going away no time soon. We know there's a major disconnect between incomes and housing costs, supply and demand. I think everybody knows that. But for us, we will continue to be as nimble as we can, continue to try and problem solve, because at this moment in time, everybody, this is a challenge. And let me also say thank you to the Aon board. I believe we have the best board in the business of affordable housing, and the great work the board is doing, supported by the leadership team and the rank and file staff. Are we in tough times? Absolutely. Will we bend and fold? Absolutely not. So, Tyler, I just wanted to kind of give that quick overview, but think about it this way before I close on these comments. Resident experience, tightening up our portfolio, getting prepared for the next 40 years at Aon. So I use this concept called the bridge period. The bridge period for us is really righting the ship from the impacts that has hit us over the last several years, anchored by the pandemic. And we're hoping to be stronger as we continue to do this work. So with that, Tyler, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, Eric, I think that's a really valuable and fantastic summary of the situation. And I want to remind folks listening in that please feel free to ask questions. You can submit those in the Q&A function, and then those are going to be pushed to me to ask to Eric. So feel free to submit questions in the chat. Eric, you mentioned in your summary the strength of Aon's board, and there's been some changes on Aon's board recently. We've added new members. So can you talk about those changes, talk about why they were made, and kind of what the strength is of the board that we currently have?
Yeah, great question, Tyler. The board, and let me just say this to everyone in an accelerated fashion. I'm talking about less than a year. The board has created a series of new committees, and they are leading with this point of engagement. So we have not only resident participation on the board, we have highly educated and skilled board members that are actually getting into the nitty gritty of what we do to help us solve some of these problems. This is somewhat different from the past. The past was more like, well, board, you over here, staff, you over there. This new arrangement is about adding additional sort of horsepower and having the board weigh in on both strategy and overall sort of thinking in terms of how we move the organization. And we are going to need that as we continue to pivot for the future.
Fantastic. All right, just as kind of a continuation of that question, Eric, there's also been changes structurally on Aon's leadership team. Can you talk some about that and your strategy behind those?
Yeah, let me just say this. Part of the strategy around the leadership changes have been to really do more of reducing silos within the organization. And let me give you an example. Real estate. Laura Russ serves as Aon's chief real estate officer. That means all things real estate is now under one umbrella versus, let's say, the past of Aon, you would have had like asset management, HD, operations, operating sort of like independently. If we are going to be the organization we want to be and continue to grow our abilities, the changes in the leadership team is about shrinking the siloism, bringing those components together so we can actually move much more aggressive as we address these challenges.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And you kind of answered this question a little bit in your response to the last one, but can you discuss maybe in more detail, or is there anything else you want to say about the changes specifically in Aon's property operations department?
Yeah, I think more importantly, the changes that are really important. We are driving first with data, real life data. We're getting to the core of being able to explain issues and challenges based on data. Number two, embedding resident services closer with the properties so they can be more responsive to the resident needs. That piece, guys, is really a pretty significant shift for us, because in order for us to make effective decisions, we need real-time data to do the work we are doing.
Awesome. Eric, the next question is about external collaboration. So how are we working with other housing organizations? And then as the landscape of organizations in the community changes, how are we covering gaps and working with other orgs to cover those gaps?
Yeah, Tyler, that's a great question. Let me say this too. We are like hyper collaborative. And let me just say this. Aon's work during the last legislative session, where we have teamed up and we continue to do it today with Common Bond, PPL, Catholic Charities, and we will also foster a greater relationship with Beacon, with their new CEO coming on, who's a former county commissioner, who I just happen to know pretty well. So between that and our engagement with cities, legislators, oh my goodness, from just engaging as much as we can, that's the strength of Aon. We'll continue to do it. Now, keep in mind, I'm gonna use the term co-opetition. Co-opetition is when your partners come together to work on issues together where we're not competing against each other. So that spirit is alive and well at Aon.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
All right, so this is a question from Michelle. Are there proposed Aon projects impacted by the court decision on the Minneapolis 2040 plan?
I would say no.
Okay.
We have no projects being impacted by that plan as it stands right now.
Yeah. All right. Another question, Eric, just from you mentioned a little bit about how we're utilizing data in specifically property operations work, but what are other ways that we're utilizing data, and how is that impacting our decision-making process?
Yeah, let me say this too. So not just from the operations, we could actually tell you right now, based on the data, we can show you live how our properties are trending now in terms of vacancies and things of that nature. But collecting information both on the security side, challenges, information from residents to build our ability to be able to respond effectively. So really, to Tyler's question, it's basically everything that we are trying to measure from a data perspective. We're sort of in the early stages of it, but let me say this. Through the board committee, we're able to really identify metrics that are now aligned to reporting measures that we are going to emphasize. So it's just not in operations, it's basically everywhere. We're going to do the same thing on our resource development side, so we can be better sort of aligned in terms of what we're doing in that space. Same thing on the housing development side as well.
Awesome. And Eric, I will take credit for that question, but most of these questions are coming from other people.
Well, no, that's a great question, because that data is really helping us out. And I think everybody knows, look, in today's world, you have to lead with data. If you don't have it, you're sort of like flying blind.
Well, that's very true. Another question from the group: are there particular neighborhoods or cities in the Twin Cities metro area that we are prioritizing for developing or saving more affordable homes?
That is an excellent question. Here's what we've been doing. We have been meeting with cities throughout the region. We have been as far as Duluth, Mankato, Plymouth, Rochester, suburbs on both sides of the river, St. Paul and Minneapolis. We are not going to be constrained by just Minneapolis or St. Paul, because we know the housing need is tremendous everywhere you go. But what we are trying to do is find cities that are ready to go. So when I mean ready to go, not using the, oh, we don't want any affordable housing in our community. We're looking for communities that are saying, hey, we want to figure this out. Let's work together to do it. So we're not running into super barriers right now. So we have been spending a lot of time just engaging with cities. And I must admit, it's actually pretty good conversations. And a lot of cities are simply surprised that a developer would basically call and say, hey, what do you guys think? What do you want to do?
Great. Another question, Eric. What are we hearing from Aon residents that informs our priorities?
One, number one, safety, 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 safety. And we are hearing this across the board from Minneapolis, St. Paul, the suburbs. It is a big issue. And to be honest with everyone, we are struggling with this issue because imagine if Aon has to deploy its resources to pay for security. What happens there is there's no money for maintenance, there's no money for operations and all of this stuff. And we reach out to the cities, we talk about this issue constantly, and we do not want our residents to be feeling like they're living in buildings where they are hostages to outside circumstances where you have individuals constantly trying to break into properties, trying to constantly destroy properties. So what we are doing in that regard, we are working with a high level security specialist to help us start to design and identify ways we can try to get some control. And I must say, and I think everybody knows this, the issue of public safety is the issue of, something that cities have to deal with. We don't make excuses in that regard, but I can tell you that we are trying everything we possibly can. But that is the number one issue. Number two would be ongoing, let's say, issues of capital improvements. I started out by saying the pandemic has really put a strain on a lot of properties. So I would really say those two issues are the predominant issues that we hear from the residents.
Yeah. Eric, another question, and I'll give you a phone a friend option on this one since I'm on the call, but can you talk about the new resident connections programming that Aon is rolling out?
Well, let me just say this. Our connections via the residents is really going to be embedded on, there is no sort of like just blanket approach to serving residents. What we're trying to do is become more specialized in understanding what those needs are. Some may be seniors with needs, some may be those individuals transitioning out of homeless, they have special needs, or it just may be a family or an individual that is simply trying to make it on a day-to-day basis. So the new initiative is really about aligning those needs and having a greater sort of basis, basically imprinted based on the property needs and individuals living in those properties.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think if I can take a liberty and add something, Eric, I think really a true focus on eviction prevention too. I think we've recognized just the precarious nature with many with which many folks are housed currently. And so really doing our best to intervene whenever possible to keep people in stable and safe housing. So, all right. Another question that's security related, Eric, but what are your thoughts on security measures at Aon properties, and what impact do security costs have on Aon, maybe more specifically, and why?
Let me just say this, and I can speak for the entire industry when I say this. None of us planned for the level of security costs that we have to spend. So if the question really is about, is that impacting on our financial operations of the property? Absolutely right. That's like you going to the store realizing you need to pay for something and you do not have enough money in your bank account to pay for it. So it is a significant problem and it weighs in on us heavily. When I can tell you that, led by Tyler and Laura, we are really trying to figure this thing out. And here's the thing. We have buildings where every time we try to secure, we secure the buildings. We will secure, we'll add additional locks, and guess what, guys? We right back the next day, having to go back and try to repair. And let me say this too. It's an issue for the residents, but it's also an issue for Aon staff. We have staff in our buildings being attacked by individuals that are coming from the streets, making their way into hallways, hiding in buildings, and attacking staff. It is a Herculean problem for us and others in the industry. And it has taken a lot of time and energy to try and figure this out. Because even if you were to look at Minneapolis alone, you look at the sheer number of police officers, I think the last count was maybe 500, maybe 600 officers. And the time for response is difficult. So looking at how we can partner with other organizations, that's in proximity to our properties is something that we are exploring.
Yeah. No, I think that's an important perspective, Eric, that community safety is a community problem, and relying on one person to fix it is not realistic.
Well, let me say this, Kyle, and what's sad about it and what probably hurts us the most is that the residents come to us and say, please, can you solve this? Right. And it puts us in a very weird position because, of course, we want safe buildings, but we also know, my goodness, it is not Aon's responsibility to be the police, right? It's not Aon's responsibility to be mental health providers, right? It's all of this stuff hitting all at one time.
Yeah. Yeah. Eric, changing gears a little bit here to talk about development. Aon is set to break ground on a property devoted to seniors in Big Lake in December. Why housing for seniors and why that location?
Well, first of all, it's a great location. Secondly, I talked about Aon spreading its wings somewhat. And then third, the fastest growing homeless population and individuals in need is actually the senior population. If you look at the numbers of retiring baby boomers, it's everywhere across the country. So it is an area that we need to focus because that is the fastest growing need. Think about it this way. Pensions really don't exist anymore in America. I don't know if you guys have family members that's retiring, older in age, and they have the wherewithal to spend more than 30% of their income towards housing costs. And that population is heavily impacted in the realm of seniors.
Yeah. All right. Another question from Michelle. Eric, when you first started, you talked about adding an economic opportunity component for tenants. Have any steps been taken in that direction, or what does that look like now?
Yeah, let me say this. Aon has been knocked off of its axis in the sense of the things we're thinking about almost 2 years ago is different than what we're thinking about right now, because having to pivot more towards stabilizing the organization, starting to figure out how we can deal with some of these post-pandemic challenges has required us to pivot some. So that issue is something we're definitely going to explore as part of our ongoing building of our resident services component, right? We have 17,300 residents, somewhere in that range. And we've had conversations about how can we start to create economic opportunities through things like getting prepared for home ownership, financial training, all of that stuff. So that's still on the board. That is not off of our board. But in full disclosure, we are trying to make sure Aon is here for the next 40 years.
While we're on the subject of housing specifically for seniors, I know that was 2 questions ago, but still on my mind. Is there anything special we take into account when building housing that's affordable housing that's dedicated for a senior population?
Well, a couple of things. Access to services, right? You want to be able to have a situation where the seniors in particular are in proximity. Number 2, design, where you have a design that is amenable to, let's say, the lifestyle of a individual that's aging in place. Of course, we'll make sure we do all the ADA compliant work, but space and activity space on site to allow them to feel like they are living in a place. And then the last part would be an environment where their family feels welcome to come and visit them and be part of their lives. It's really those components.
Yep. No, I think that last one, Eric, is really poignant. Some of the most rewarding experiences I've had since my time at Aon has been working with folks in Aon housing that have their family come and visit on a regular basis. And I know I've seen people even recently, and that's just it warms my heart when I get to see that opportunity. All right, are there another question about service delivery and services? What types of services are most helpful for residents to maintain stability, and how can we increase the availability of those supportive services?
Yeah, and you know what? That really depends on the needs of that specific tenant. Some may need, I'm just going to say it, additional support for issues they may be experiencing in their lives that may be impacting their mental health. Some may need services that provides greater access to transportation. Some may need services that are more closely aligned to support for daycares and things of that nature. Some may need help in the realm of paying their bills. So it really just depends, you know. And I know Tyler has been working on this. How do we work with our service providers to link those specific needs to the actual residents, right? So it's a combination of all of those different things.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Eric, to add to that, there really is a need for a reevaluation in the structure of affordable housing about what services are available at what housing level. Just because I think we all have um, gotten used to the fact that people transitioning out of homelessness should have the appropriate level of services attached to their housing placement. But oftentimes people experience instability at all kinds of different income levels and in all
Yep.
kinds of different housing, and those services need to be available
No,
and
that's that.
need to be
Yep.
funded, I think, is my plug. So
Yeah, let me just add to that. So in Tyler's description, that support would come more for individuals at 30% or
yeah,
below every median income. But what he's describing is people going up, let's say from 30% to 80% or 60%, still may have need for services. So what we want to be able to do is connect the dots
yeah.
there.
All right. So we're talking about services. We partner with a lot of groups that help provide housing stability services in Aon properties. What kinds of partnerships are you seeking out, Eric, to increase the impact or effectiveness of Aon's work?
Well, I would say a couple of different things. One, using concepts like community service cards that you can pass out, right? Having like greater sort of relationships that can minimize the time needed to help an individual. So, in other words, partnering with organizations that it's almost like a turnkey operation. Some organizations will know who will have a need for housing. Some will be able to provide those services. So how do we create better partnerships with service providers that can move at a speed we need them in terms of being there both short term and long term for the residents?
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned in a previous answer, Eric, that the diversity of need that presents
Yep.
itself with Aon residents and Aon housing. And so really trying to have a diversity of partnerships that can then match those needs more effectively instead of trying, one size fits all solutions. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And a quick question here, and I don't know the answer to this one. When is the date for Big Lake Senior Housing? I guess date for breaking ground, and then we're very wary of giving out open dates around here because
Yeah.
HD starts to look at us funny if we're
Yeah.
guaranteeing things that we haven't broke
Yeah.
ground on.
Let me just say it's coming soon. I don't have the actual date, and we can send it back out to everybody. I would have to circle back with HD to get the actual date.
Okay. All right, Janet is asking a question. Which are the most important service providing partners? We gotta be careful here. They're all important, Janet.
They all are
Every single
important.
one.
They all are important. The most important ones are the ones that are super responsive to the needs of the tenants. Because what we will do, okay, we've got the unit leased and everything good to go. All right, signed them up. Now it's up to that service provider to be super responsive. So the
Yeah.
best, without getting into like names, it's those that are responsive. And I must admit, we do know the service providers have been facing some challenges of their own. So we do take that in consideration. But again, it is the service providers that are responsive and are there for the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, Eric, I think there's probably some Aon residents tuning into the call as well. What would be your message for current residents of Aon?
On the service provider side,
Just in general that you would communicate on this call.
here's what I would say to the residents. Number one, do not hesitate to reach out to us. If you're facing any challenges, any problems, we are in the problem solving business. Now, will we be able to solve everything? Maybe not, but we will be there to listen, to engage with you. That's number one. Number two, we need you to be with us in this journey. We need partnerships with our residents. And I'm gonna tell you what that looks like. Sometimes you may find situations in your complex that you clearly see is a problem that could be coming from external sources or even people in your building. You don't have to like um, feel like you can't say anything, because ultimately we want to make sure your experience is up to standard. And then number three, we really just need to hear from you guys, period. End of story. All right. Whatever it is, do not hesitate. And I can tell you this is coming from myself, the leadership team, and the board. Let us know so we can be in a better position to make the experience what it needs to be. So I would say, do not hesitate to communicate with us. That's what I want the residents to really hear. And also know that, look, some things in the past, we can't go back in the past. What we're trying to say is join with us as we go forward in the future. That's my message to the residents, because this is a business of fighting for those in a lot of circumstances that are viewed as undeserving. That's not our perspective. Our perspective is this is the mission. Everybody working at Aon are purpose-driven individuals, and that is why we are here. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Eric, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug the fact that we have a resident portal that's on our website, aon.org/myhome. Or you can email us at myhome@aon.org and get directly in touch with central office staff who can either get the appropriate people in play to help answer your question or deal with the issue. So I think, yeah, absolutely want to echo that. And I know we've got Aon staff on the call too, who, as Eric mentioned, are super committed and dedicated to the mission of Aon in providing safe, quality, affordable homes. And so I think that, it's not possible without that group collaboration of residents and staff at Aon and donors and supporters externally to make it all work. So, Erica, a question from Becca. Thinking back on 2023, what about your work are you especially proud of?
I'm actually proud of the people at Aon. And let me tell you why. The last several years has been really, really challenging. Things have emerged that no one really saw coming. But yet, the people are still standing. The people are still committed to the work. So that is number one. Number two is the way Aon's board has shifted and taking on the challenge to becoming a stronger board. And lastly, let me say this. Aon's leadership team, they actually do a lot of stuff, and I would say that the comment I made about staff also applies to the leadership team, because many people could fold a tent and say, you know what, this is just too much stuff, right? So leading to the support we've gotten from the legislature, that was a massive team effort across the board. And I can tell you this from my experience around the country. A lot of organizations would have given up, given the challenges the last several years has really shown. So again, I'm mostly proud of the people at Aon. That includes all staff, leadership team, board, and everybody that's working with us. Because this challenge today, guys, is not about just saying, oh, we have problems, we can't do anything. It's really the opposite. And I'm finding that our people are really rising to the occasion.
Yeah. Eric, we're obviously still in the middle of a housing crisis in Minnesota. So what do you see as some of the big wins on the horizon that you're kind of looking forward to?
Big wins on the horizon. Here's what I think is on the horizon, because I'm pretty connected into most circles on these topics, both in Minnesota and around the country. The realization that, look, we do tax credit projects. It's been the sort of bread and butter for housing since, I want to say, in the mid 1980s, when the low income housing tax credit program was created. But they're starting to get to this emergence that we're going to have to start thinking beyond what we've always been doing, right? If we're going to get the type of production we need and preservation that we need. So I think what's on the horizon is starting to have greater conversations about that. Now, that's on the horizon, but what's currently that's currently in our space is just sustainability of the affordable housing industry, led by arguably the big four in the state of Minnesota, which Aon is a big contributor to the infrastructure. So that is what I see on the horizon. Now, if I had 2 hours to talk to everybody, I would talk to you about what I think a different financial model needs to be, but that's another conversation. But I do think that there is a lot of discussions around how can we start adding to the mix of ways to do affordable housing.
Eric, we may do one of these where we let you put your professor hat on and give us a lecture about alternate financial models, but
absolutely
not today, not for the last 15 minutes of the conversation.
Yeah, I was getting ready to go there, but that's
fine. Fantastic. Well, another question that's in the pipeline, Eric, and kind of dovetails nicely into what you just said. How is Aon maintaining affordable rent for residents when the cost of living is going up?
Well, let me say this. We have a lot of conversations about trying to maintain the rent. That is not maintaining rent at the appropriate level. That's not standard. We will do everything we humanly can before we even talk about raising rent. So let me give you a great example. If you were to look across our portfolio and look at capital needs that's required, the first thing a real estate development company would do is let's raise the rents to cover the capital costs, right? That's not how we see it. Some people would argue, well, you should be seeing it like that, but then it's counter to what we're trying to do. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out ways to get sources that will not impact on raising rents, if that makes sense, because it's kind of counter to what we are trying to do. Because again, normally what you would do is say, okay, let's raise the rents by, I was making it up, $300 so we can get enough to do all of these capital improvements. What we try to do is say, okay, let's talk to philanthropic organizations. Let's talk to government partners, in some cases, corporate partners, to see if we can come up with resources, which we're going to try to do more of to help the property so we don't have to go about raising rents. And that's counter to the system in terms of how the system works.
Fantastic. Eric, this is a two-part question. I'll let you decide which one to answer first, but the first part is, what's the most innovative approach to affordable housing that you've seen across the US, or I'm going to expand even globally? And then, are there other parts of the country that are seeing success addressing their affordable housing shortages? And if so, what can we learn from them here in Minnesota?
Yep, great question. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. So real estate development is about reaching certain financial returns. Now, theoretically, that doesn't align with affordable housing, right? So some of the most innovative approaches I've seen has been what's called a straight line approach, where the developer's return, financing, equity are basically aligned in one straight line. Problem with that is interest rates is throwing that thinking out of the box because, if a developer had lower returns expectations, lower equity return expectations and financing that was aligned, you could blow this thing out of the water. But that's not how it's working. So there are a couple of organizations I know based in Detroit, um, uh, New Jersey, and out California trying to move that needle forward. Now, in terms of around the country, the Minnesota model is heavily based upon what the state is going to do. In other sectors that's starting to emerge, Dallas, Seattle, San Francisco, Detroit, Washington, D.C., New York, Charlotte are pushing more to the private sector, creating low cost funds. Even in this day of high interest rates, there are funds emerging that are closer to 3.5%. That is what we need in Minnesota, and we need it in a big form because this is a state, a region that is economically strong. And I do believe that our corporate side is still on the sidelines because we have not made an ask of the corporate community here to get in this game to support affordable housing to create lower cost funds to do the work necessary. That is where I like to see Minnesota go, because then you can have the state doing this thing on tax credit side. You can have private sources that are coming in that are working to get, lower cost funds. Now keep in mind, it could be a charitable contribution converted to a loan product at a lower cost to really drive this thing. That is what I would really, really like to see. And I think that's where other sectors around the country are going. And I'd love to see Minnesota get there.
Um, Again, to stay on that theme, Eric, can you talk a little bit more about the current economic and social environment that Aon and other housing organizations like Aon are in? I know you mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but maybe in more detail, what does that look like from where you sit?
Here's what it looks like. Imagine for a minute, um, whatever the situation, um, unintended consequences of the eviction moratorium where rent was no longer paid. So think about that for a minute. Aon and its other partners have faced a series of financial issues related to non-payment of rent, right? Non-payment of rent. So when we talk about the economic consequences, they are really like unintended consequences coming out of well-thinking policies that had unintended consequences. So millions of dollars of unpaid rent, where you have your mortgage company saying, hey, wait a minute, guys, your properties are not cash flowing, but you know what? I need my money. So take that across Aon's portfolio. Some properties are better than others. Add to that the wear and tear of an extended eviction process, where let's say Hennepin County courts were backed up for months, and your normal wear and tear, which would cost, let's say, $2,000 or so to turn a unit to get it ready for leasing, would now jump to $7,000, $8,000, right? So we think about all of these different conditions and add to that the social economic conditions around social unrest, increasing crime, all of this stuff impacting at one single moment in time. Now, and having a lending space that's not really flexible. Well, you know what, Dr. Johnson? We don't care about all of that. We have I'm making it up on this one, we have an 8% return and you need to get us our money. Well, we have vacancies because, we have to clear out individuals that just didn't want to pay their rent anymore. And we're dealing with backlogs of unpaid rent. So it's difficult to deal with. So we talk about the financial conditions in a simple form, economic and financially. That is what we're dealing with. That is what our counterpart organizations are doing. If they were on this call, they would tell you the same thing. And lastly, expecting something to the tune of a 40, 45, maybe 50% increase in insurance costs. So you add that to the numbers where you're trying to maintain affordability, right? Now you're looking at a situation like, my goodness, what do you do? So Tyler, that's kind of like the series of forces that we're really dealing with. That's just weighing in on Aon and others as well.
Yeah. Probably a couple more questions here, Eric. We're getting close to our time. One it came through the chat, should be a pretty quick one. Does Aon ever provide housing to people who have experienced homelessness and help them find a place to live?
Oh, absolutely. That is that is part of our core mission. That is what we do. Yes.
Yeah. And then another question that I think is probably a good one to end on, unless another couple questions come through at the last minute. But how can individual community members make an impact to address the affordable housing crisis in Minnesota?
Yeah. Let me say it this way. One, you can support us financially, help us weather this storm. If it's not us, it's others in the industry that really need help right about now. Then I think two, helping with this broken narrative. Let me tell you about the narrative. The narrative is something to the effect of, you will hear it everywhere you go. Well, we think affordable housing is important, but you know what? We don't want it over here. Oh, it's going to create more crime. Oh, it's going to create all of this traffic. Oh, everything is going to be horrible. We need help to counter the narrative, because the narrative is important, because all we're talking about is just regular people, simply put, trying to get up every single day to make their way through society and hopefully making a positive contribution. So to be honest with you, even if you're talking to your elected officials, policymakers, or whatever, write about it, call about it, and say, wait a minute, as far as I can tell, affordable housing is a plus on a community's local GDP, gross domestic product. So I think it's really about helping that in that regard, to help us with this narrative, because you will see and hear things that just does not make sense. And let me close on this. I'm at Starbucks in line getting my $10 coffee, whatever it was, right? And the person, female, says to me, hey, what do you do for a living? I said, oh, I work for Aon, work on affordable housing, give people quality housing, everything. Oh, wow, those people need help. I was like, so what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a school teacher. I said, okay, so do you have like roommates, or what was the case? It's just me. And I'm like, well, I know what school teachers make, right? So you would actually fall into this category, but your description of the narrative is actually the problem, because you're saying those people need help, when in fact, you're actually one of them. So it's kind of long-winded, but it's really about helping that narrative, because it is not what people think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And Eric, you mentioned, even if it's not individual contributions, adding your voice as an advocate to state legislators, to others, to advocate for some of the investment that they've made in the past couple of years. I know that the tax credit initiative we've mentioned recently has been a huge help to us, and share legislation, 4D legislation. I mean, there's a lot of things that people can add their voices to advocate for that are massive benefits. So I think the other thing is just talking to your neighbors and getting out there, and as you mentioned, changing that narrative. Talk to them about the importance of affordable housing and why it is such an impact in our community.
So to everyone, go online and type in affordable housing cartoons. Watch what you see in terms of the communication, in terms of what people say. I'm talking about the cartoons. The cartoons will speak volumes in terms of the narrative. So just think about that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Eric, thank you so much for your time today. We're at the end of our conversation, but thank you for being here. Thank you for your expertise, the leadership that you bring to the organization and the community. It has a huge impact on not only the people at Aon, but I know the affordable housing industry at large. So thank you so much. I've got one more ask, since it is Give to the Max Day. Any gift, just a reminder that you make today, is going to be matched. So feel free to head over to aon.org/donate if you'd like to contribute to Aon as part of Give to the Max Day. Thank you so much for everybody who's attended today. Thanks for your questions. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, if there's a question that didn't get answered that you'd like to ask, feel free to include it in the chat or email it over to us, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a great afternoon.